Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke from Guild Umbra. In this video, we're going to touch base on the Spellslinger, more specifically the healing side, our role. And we're going to kind of talk about stat priorities like we've done in previous videos, and kind of what you look for as you're leveling, what you look for on pieces of gear, more of or less of. So anyway, we're going to dive right in. First primary stat for the Spellslinger. As a healer, you want support power. Support power equals more heals. Stronger heals at that. The next primary stat would be Moxie. And reason for this is because it gives us critical hit rating and critical severity rating. So you crit more on your heals, and when you do crit, you have bigger crits as a result of critical severity rating. Next primary stat would be base health, or grit for that matter, because a dead healer does not heal. And so it's kind of important that you put some priority on your grit. Especially being a light armor wearer, like the Spellslinger is. And I guess lastly, you could put in tech. You're obviously not going to be tanking mobs, I hope. But in those few instances where maybe you throw a heal and the tank hasn't pulled, or has started to aggro and gets pulled, gets to pulling, the mobs will run at you, until the tank gets aggro. So, it might be in your best interest somewhat to prioritize this stat. So those are the primary stats that we look at. Now let's talk about secondary stats. Secondary stats for Spellslinger healing. You want to look at support power. Then you want to look at critical hit chance, followed by critical hit severity, followed by max health. And if you get these two, it's a bonus. But it's not something I'm going to go out of my way and look for, because as I stated before, hopefully as a healer you're not taking mobs. Now, as I've stated in other videos, if you find a piece of armor or a piece of a weapon for that matter that has stronger secondary stats than primary stats, then you would take the piece of armor in most cases that has more stronger secondary stats. And the reason for this is simply, as you can see here, 1 point of insight on your gear gives you 0.50 support power. And that gradually goes down as you level up. In other words, fill out your, in this case, 30 points of insight. It'll slowly start degrading the amount of support power you get from stacking insight. Whereas if you had a piece of, well, let's say a gun, since we're talking about the Spellslinger, dual pistols, that had stronger support power, then the gun that you currently have equipped, then in this case, you would go with the gun that has the stronger support power, if that makes sense. Now, when we're talking about stats, something to think about too is something called milestones. At certain points, as you stack up, stats on your character, you're going to reach something called milestones. Now, you can't see them here in WS base, but in game you'll see them, kind of down here as little points of, well, let's say 15 insight. And right below that milestone, it'll tell you what you get as a result of getting 15 insight. Okay, in this case, it would be more support power. But I explain that to say this, that there is an if clause in my statement, that yes, if you have a piece of armor or a piece of weapon, or a weapon that offers more secondary stats than primary stats, then obviously you go with it. But the if statement is, if I drop below 15 insight as a result of taking the the piece of armor or weapon, um, what am I losing from that milestone? Like if it's 30 support power as a result of keeping the primary weapon on me, um, then you have to gauge for yourself whether or not that new weapon is actually an upgrade. Okay, so you do have to do a little bit of thinking when you're gearing up. Now, obviously, when you're leveling, you want the primary stat for your class. Okay, but as you get later to end game, then you have to sort of start balancing out your stats and seeing which one is going to give me, or which one's going to give me the, do the best for me, if that makes sense, in my current role, which in this case will be a healer. So, um, just some things to think about. So, in summary, primary stats would be insight, followed by moxie, followed by grit, and then lastly, but not a high priority, is tech. Secondary stats would be support power, critical hit chance, critical hit severity, max health. Now, one thing I didn't talk about real quick, and it's very important that I do talk about this as a healer. Our resource, mana in other games, is focus. So, when you're thinking about focus, one secondary stat that's not listed on WS base, and I hope they find some way to put this in, is focus recovery rate, which is basically like mana regen in other games and whatnot. As a healer, you're not gonna want to stack, a bunch of critical hit and critical hit severity. So in reality, the secondary stats, and I kind of made a mistake on this, should be more gauged toward this: support power, focus recovery rating, then crit hit chance, crit hit severity, then max health. Okay, and the reason for this is, like I stated, focus recovery rate is important because if you run out of focus, you can't heal. So therefore, you can't do your job as a healer in the raid or leveling or grouping, for that matter. So especially early on in my experience, having some focus recovery rating on your gear is very important. Um, Especially if you're running in pug groups, pickup groups or whatever. Um, it's, I would say, a little less um, important in organized guilds and stuff, because most of the time you're all sitting in TeamSpeak and you all can talk to each other and explain things to each other a little better and clearer. So you wouldn't have to heal as much as you would in pug groups, if that makes sense. So anyway, that is basically the end of my video. If you like what you saw, hit that like button on YouTube. Um, I like to have some feedback on these videos and see kind of what you guys' thoughts are, because this is my opinion. This is not necessarily, alpha, omega, end all be all video. This is an informative video that, from my experience. So it's my opinion. Um, Also, if you'd like to see more coverage, like when I go live on Twitch, for you Twitch users, my name is on Twitch is Big Dog LB. Don't ask. It's just a nickname. So if you want to keep up with when I'm making new videos, that's a good way to start. Those are some good resources for you. Again, this is Luke from Guild Umbra, having a blast with this game, and maybe next video we'll talk a little bit about maybe go into some builds with the Spellslinger healer this time around. A lot of times I like to do an overview, but we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, you guys have a great night. We'll see you next time.